Now, in June 1985, I went to see Bruce Springsteen at Ullevi in Gothenburg, together with 125,000 other people. And I don't know why I went there. I preferred disco, or the Smiths, or synthesizer music. But in Sweden at that time, it was almost a duty to attend a Bruce Springsteen concert. And I stood there at Ullevi and listened to Springsteen. But I didn't feel anything. At least not the same as the people around me, which they expressed enthusiastically through movement, claps, cheers, and sweat. But afterwards, when people asked me how it had been, I said that it had been great, because I had traveled all the way to Gothenburg to see Bruce Springsteen. And I was ashamed that I hadn't felt anything. Now, maybe my doubts at the Bruce Springsteen concert at Ullevi can be connected to why so many people feel nervous about going to the theater or performance art. Because you feel like a child who's too old to know. No. Because you feel, I thought it would be a rhetorical gesture to look at the children. I'm speaking to new children. Because you feel like a child who's old enough to know that Father Christmas doesn't exist. But still, year after year, you have to go through the same humiliating ritual, because otherwise there will not be any Christmas presents. Now, if this had been a Bruce Springsteen concert, to make it a little bit more lively, Bruce might ask people to say yeah if they can feel the spirit, and people will say yeah. Either because they're actually able to feel the spirit, or because they're afraid of making Bruce upset, so that he'll only play for 2 hours instead of his usual 3 or 4. But when people who feel the spirit are feeling the spirit, what kind of spirit is it exactly they are feeling? And are they aware that Bruce Springsteen is a Catholic agnostic? And does Catholic agnosticism have anything to do with the spirit that is being felt? Or are people simply feeling the spirit of Bruce? Or are there many different spiritual feelings going on at one and the same time? Or are the people who feel the spirit simply fooling themselves? And when they think they are feeling a spiritual feeling, it's actually a feeling of fear. A feeling of fear of making Bruce upset so that he'll only play for 2 hours. In September 1995, I started art school at Konstfack in Stockholm. And I had only made one art piece before, so I was nervous about what I could get away with. For the first school exhibition, I did this. A pair of ready-mades on a pair of institutionalizing pedestals. Now the pedestals had wheels, so if my teachers would judge that this was not proper art, they could immediately be rolled out of the exhibition. Now, the difference between low culture and high culture consists of pedestals and candy and Coca-Cola and popcorn and beer. If you're attending a cultural event and you're able to eat and drink, then you know it's a low cultural event. Unless you're a part of that very exclusive group of people who gets invited to art openings. If you get invited to art openings, it's because you've been judged to have a cultural sensibility that is so sophisticated that you can be trusted to attend a high cultural event at, let's say, a museum of modern or contemporary art, and enjoy a glass of white wine at the same time. You might even be trusted to enjoy a tasty snack, like a mini meatball, as long as that mini meatball does not exceed a diameter of 35 millimeters. When you ask people about what a museum mostly reminds them of, most people will answer that a museum mostly reminds them of a church. Now, that makes eating and drinking in a museum a very serious thing, because it's like the Holy Communion in a church. In a church, everyone can enjoy the body and blood of Jesus Christ, as long as they believe in Jesus Christ. But to believe in modern or contemporary art is not enough to secure a place at the museum altar of mini meatballs and white wine. And in order to secure a place at the museum altar of mini meatballs and white wine, some people are willing to pay thousands of dollars in sponsorship money. Imagine a hedge fund billionaire sponsoring a museum of modern or contemporary art, attending exhibition openings of modern or contemporary art with mini meatballs and white wine. After a certain amount of mini meatballs and a certain amount of white wine, even a hedge fund billionaire will reach a point where he or she will have to go to the toilet. And that modern or contemporary art museum toilet will be in a completely different zone than the zone of exhibitions and aesthetic discourse. It will even be clearly separated from the gift shop. And in the toilet zone, there will be lockable cubicles with receptacles for human bodily waste. Receptacles. Made of sanitary porcelain. As every qualified audience member of modern or contemporary art will know, not all sanitary porcelain is alike. In 1917, Marcel Duchamp put a urinal on a pedestal and called it Fountain. In 2006, this was voted the most influential artwork of all time. And the fountain is even more exclusive than a hedge fund billionaire. There are 46 hedge fund billionaires in the world, but there are only 17 authorized fountains. And of those, one seems to have disappeared, and another has probably gone to pieces. Most of the fountains are kept in museum collections. But in 1999, one of them was sold for $1.7 million. How piece of sanitary porcelain can be turned into a $1 million art masterpiece is to a hedge fund billionaire an exciting mystery. The mystery of money for almost nothing. It's like the holy grail of money making. I forgot where I'm in the script. Sorry. Oh yeah, okay. The holy grail of money making, and not only money, but social prestige. By just buying a $10 ticket to a museum of modern or contemporary art, anyone can have more social prestige than a hedge fund billionaire, even if they cheat and spend most of their visit in the museum cafe. And to be allowed to look at art in a museum of modern or contemporary art while having mini meatballs and white wine is much more prestigious than just being a hedge fund billionaire. But what happens when a hedge fund billionaire has mini meatballs and white wine in a museum of modern or contemporary art and suddenly has to go to the toilet? Intellectually, probably nothing happens. Somewhere in the back of his or her mind, the hedge fund billionaire will be aware of the privileged position of the fountain in modern and contemporary art. But while disposing his or her bodily waste, the hedge fund billionaire will simply not give any thought to the fountain. Not even if that disposal is made into a urinal. But this could be changed. If every museum would put up a framed photograph of the fountain in connection to the toilet zone. Not only for the benefit of the hedge fund billionaires, but for everyone. If the fountain is the most influential artwork of all time, shouldn't that influence be felt all the way into the museum toilet? In 1954, Leo Fender launched the Stratocaster electric guitar. Before that, Fender had designed the Esquire, which had turned into the Broadcaster, which had turned into the Telecaster. But even the Telecaster was far from a perfect electric guitar. And the reason for that was that Fender couldn't play the guitar. Fender could play the saxophone, but he couldn't play the guitar. So when Fender designed the Stratocaster, he listened closely to the response of the players of the Esquire and the Broadcaster and the Telecaster, and to the people who he worked with. And he made several preliminary versions of the Stratocaster, which were tested by his guitar-playing friends. After 3 years of experimentation, the Stratocaster was finally released to the public. The response was phenomenal. Before the Stratocaster, the sex symbol in a band played the trumpet or the saxophone. even vocalists were not that important. And the guitarist sat in the rhythm section. Before the Stratocaster, a boy would get a suit when he was 16, and then he was a man. With Fender guitars came teenage pop culture, which completely changed the Western world, not only culturally, but also economically. And today there are teenagers who are more than 70 years old. 2 years later, in 1956, Leo Fender tried to do the same for the mandolin as he had done for the guitar, and created this the Mando Strat. But it didn't quite catch on in the same way. The two most expensive guitars ever sold were both Fender Stratocasters. The most expensive one was sold for $2.7 million. But that doesn't quite count, because it was autographed by 23 of the biggest names in rock and roll, and sold for the victims of the tsunami in 2004. It looks like this. $2.7 million. The Norwegian-American economist Torstein Veblen said that sometimes price has a value in itself. Sometimes some people buy some products just because they're expensive. Because sometimes price has a value in itself. This is something the Fender company has completely understood. Because there's literally a Fender for every pocket. You can buy a Squier, which is Fender's budget brand. You can buy a Squier Stratocaster for $99. And from there it goes up all the way to the Fender Ritchie Blackmore Tribute Stratocaster for $8,000. Now, somewhere in between the Squier and the Ritchie Blackmore Tribute Stratocaster, somewhere in between the $99 and $8,000, you can get a basic Stratocaster built in the United States. Now, what does Fender call these guitars? They call them American Standard. And that, of course, makes me wonder if there's any connection between American Standard electric guitars and American Standard sanitary porcelain. Now, the second most expensive guitar ever sold, and the second most expensive Stratocaster, is the same thing. It doesn't carry any autographs. It was sold for $2 million to Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, because Jimi Hendrix had played it at the Woodstock Festival. He played left-handed, but he didn't play a left-handed guitar. He had just simply turned it upside down. So there's nothing wrong with the picture. Now, when Hendrix played his Stratocaster at Woodstock, and people wanted to have candy, Coca-Cola, popcorn, or beer, they did. And no one tried to stop them. Because even if that guitar later was sold for $2 million, this was still a low cultural event. Thank you.